We are accustomed to believing that great civilizations die slowly, that empires decay over centuries until they finally collapse under their own weight. But more than 3,000 years ago, the world experienced something very different. In just a few decades, entire kingdoms disappeared. Cities were reduced to ashes. Trade routes collapse, and peoples who once ruled the world disappear without a trace. This is the story of the greatest collapse in antiquity, a mystery that scientists still cannot fully explain. You are used to thinking that civilizations die slowly, that great empires rot from within like an old tree. First comes the crack, then the decay, and finally the collapse. A beautiful theory, but wrong. In 1177 BC, the world was almost as complex as ours. 8 great powers traded tin from Afghanistan, copper from Cyprus, and gold from Nubia. Ships carried amber from the Baltic Sea to Egypt. Hittite kings wrote to their pharaohs on clay tablets in the diplomatic Akkadian language, like we use English today. Mycenaean warriors ate bread made from Egyptian wheat. Merchants kept warehouses in dozens of ports. This was the first globalization in human history. And then, in just 50 years, it all disappeared. Not partially, completely. 8 civilizations, thousands of cities, millions of people, burnt palaces, abandoned ports, and a lost writing system. Entire nations forgot how to read for almost 4 centuries. Archaeologists dig layer after layer, and everywhere they see the same thing: ash, and then nothing. From Greece to Syria, from Anatolia to the Nile, it's as if someone's hand has swept across half the known world. Scientists have identified more than 20 possible causes: earthquakes, drought, epidemics, uprisings, invasions, climate change, and a collapse in trade. But each theory explains only part of the catastrophe. None explains everything. Summer, 1190 BC, northern coast of Syria, city of Ugarit, the richest port in the eastern Mediterranean. A port where ships from Cyprus, Crete, and Egypt docked, a palace with a library of 8,000 clay tablets. It was here that one of the first alphabets in the world appeared. 30 symbols that would later give rise to the Greek, Latin, and Cyrillic alphabets. 6 languages are heard in the marketplace. In the palace, scribes prepare reports for King Amurapi. And then, the first letter arrives. The king of Alasia, the ancient name for Cyprus, warns, "The enemy is coming from the sea with ships. They have burned my cities." Amurapi answers. His clay tablet was discovered in 1929 under a layer of ash. His words sound like a final cry. The enemy. His ships have come here. My cities are burned. My army is far away. My ships are in foreign lands. The country is left alone. The letter was never sent. The messenger was unable to escape in time. The clay tablet remained unbaked in the scribe's oven. The fire that destroyed the city accidentally baked it, and so the last words of Ugarit survived through the millennia. In the 19th century, Egyptologist Emil Brugsch read Egyptian inscriptions about the so-called Sea Peoples, mysterious invaders who had invaded the Nile Delta in the same years. He decided that they were the destroyers of civilization, barbarians from the north who had burned the world to ashes. But this theory doesn't explain everything. How these people maintained a huge fleet, how they attacked Cyprus, Syria, Anatolia, and Egypt simultaneously, and why cities far inland also collapsed at the same time. Mycenae burned at the same time as Ugarit. The Hittite capital Hattusa, hundreds of miles from the sea, was abandoned in the same decades. This doesn't seem like a typical invasion. In 2013, paleoclimatologists led by David Kanievsky studied sediments from a Syrian lake. Each layer of pollen reveals the climate for a particular year. The result is shocking. Between 1200 and 1150 BC, the region was hit by a catastrophic drought, the worst in 3 centuries. Crops fail from Greece to Mesopotamia. Hungry people flee their lands, armies revolt, trade ceases, cities decline. In Hattusa, archaeologists are discovering that the residents didn't just flee. They took out their valuables, locked up the archives, and set fire to the royal quarter themselves. It's as if they knew the end was coming. At the same time, the Aegean world is shaken by a series of powerful earthquakes. Faults run through the palaces of Mycenae and Tiryns. And then, the picture begins to come together. Drought weakens civilizations. Earthquakes destroy cities. Famine causes riots. Trade collapses. And then ships come from the sea, full of people who no longer have a home. But who are the sea peoples? This remains one of the greatest mysteries in history. All we know about them is carved on the walls of the Temple of Ramses III at Medinet Habu. They depict bearded warriors wearing strange helmets, and behind them are chariots with women and children. This doesn't look like an army on the march. It looks like a people on the run. The hieroglyphs list their names: Peliset, Teker, Shekelesh, Denyen, and Weshesh. 5 peoples in one alliance. The islands shook simultaneously. No country could withstand their weapons. For a long time, historians considered them a barbarian horde. But in 1992, archaeologist Mario Liverani suggested something more sinister. What if the sea peoples weren't invaders from outside? What if these are the very inhabitants of the crumbling kingdoms? Refugees turned pirates, hungry peasants, homeless sailors, and masterless mercenaries. Perhaps the civilization was not destroyed from without. Perhaps it destroyed itself. Archaeologists are finding Mycenaean pottery in Syria, Cypriot jewelry in Anatolia, and Aegean weapons in ruined cities in Palestine. These objects did not get there through trade, but with people fleeing the collapse. And then comes another clue. One of the peoples in Ramses' inscriptions, the Peleset, later settled on the shores of Canaan. In the Bible, they would be called Philistines, and the land they settled would become known as Palestine, an echo of a catastrophe more than 3,000 years ago that still resonates in the modern world. Meanwhile, in Pylos, the palace of King Nestor is keeping its last records. Archaeologists have discovered clay tablets with ominous orders: send soldiers to the shore, prepare the oarsmen, melt the bronze for weapons, move the women and children inland. Even the slaves were given spears. This was not preparation for an ordinary war. This was preparation for the end. The king of Pylos knew something was coming. The scribes calmly wrote everything down on the clay, without emotion, without panic. And then the palace burned down. The observers were no help. In the ruins of Pylos, archaeologists discover 40 skeletons. Most are in positions of escape. One of them lies in the corridor to the archives, as if he had run to the tablets to save the records, but failed. In the 19th century, the English archaeologist Arthur Evans suggested that the Mycenaeans were destroyed by the Dorians, northern Greek tribes who came from the Balkans. This version survived until the mid-20th century and still occasionally appears in textbooks, but it is almost certainly wrong. Archaeologists find no evidence of a mass invasion. No northern weapons, no new pottery, no clear traces of a new people who came and stayed. Palaces burn, but in their wake, no new world emerges, only emptiness. The Mycenaean civilization depended on a thin bronze thread stretched across half the known world. Tin came from faraway Afghanistan through numerous intermediaries, and copper from Cyprus. Without bronze, the callous army was reduced to a handful of men with clubs. No army, no taxes. No taxes, no palace. No palace, no civilization. One broken link, and the whole system collapses. And the most bitter thing is that when the Mycenaean world disappears, it takes with it its own memory. In central Anatolia, on a high plateau, stood Hattusa, the capital of the Hittites, a people almost forgotten today, but in those centuries strong enough to speak with the pharaohs as equals. The Hittite Empire, which ruled over the lands of present-day Turkey, northern Syria, and part of Lebanon, used chariots as its striking force. At Kadesh, in 1274 BC, the Hittites clashed with Ramesses II in the largest chariot battle in human history, thousands of chariots on one field. The battle ended inconclusively, and 16 years later, the Hittites and Egyptians signed the first known peace treaty in history, a copy of which is now kept in the United Nations building. Hattusa was the capital of a true superpower. Walls for miles, lion gates, temples, an archive of tens of thousands of clay tablets, and cuneiform in multiple languages. There they knew how to forge iron, conduct diplomacy, and maintain a huge army. And then, desperate letters begin to emerge from the archives. The last great Hittite king, Suppiluliuma II, ruled during years of famine. In one letter, he asks for grain from his vassals. In another, he asks Egypt to send ships of wheat. The ships arrive, but they are too few. In an Egyptian inscription, the pharaoh boasts that he has sent grain to preserve life in the land of Hatti. But that no longer sounds like help. It sounds like an epitaph. When a superpower begs its neighbors for bread, it is already dead. It just hasn't fallen yet. There was a famine. But there was a second blow, a blow to the very foundation of the Bronze Age. Metal. Bronze is made from copper and tin. There was copper in Cyprus, but tin was almost never mined in the eastern Mediterranean. It came from faraway places, from the mountains of Afghanistan, or from the far west, via sea routes reaching Britain. This means that the military power of entire empires depended on long and fragile trade routes. Drought hit caravans, pirates hit sea routes, rebellions hit merchants. And the tin stopped coming. One year, then another, then another. After a few years, the old weapons couldn't be replaced. The broken sword was no longer a sword. In the last layers of Hattusa, archaeologists discovered something strange. The storerooms were not looted, but carefully emptied. The royal seals are hidden under the floor as if someone hoped to return. There are no signs of a siege. There are no masked skeletons in front of the walls. No one stormed Hattusa. The inhabitants left on their own. They took what they could carry, locked the doors, set the palace on fire, and disappeared into Anatolia. Then they forgot their language, their writing, and their gods. The Hittite language was deciphered only in 1915 by the Czech philologist Bedřich Rosny. After 3,000 years of silence, a vanished people speaks again. The Nile Delta. Summer, 1177 BC. Egypt is the last great power of the Bronze Age. The Hittites are gone. Ugarit is ashes. Mycenae is burning. And then sails appear on the horizon. Not an army, an entire people on the water. Ships full of warriors, women, children, cattle, and wagons. They don't come just to fight. They come to settle. Standing in their way is Ramses III, the last pharaoh to still have a real army. He does what other kings fail to do. He prepares. He builds a fleet in the delta. He garrisons the coast. He hires Libyan and Nubian archers. He blocks the mouth of the Nile with chains and sunken boats. When the sea people's ships enter the delta, they find themselves trapped. Narrow channels, reeds, archers from the shores, Egyptian ships that press them into the water. The reliefs at Medinet Habu show it all. Broken masts, falling warriors, women clinging to debris, and Ramses standing on his chariot with a bow in his hand. Egypt wins. The last superpower repels the attack that destroys the others. But here comes the cruelest part. Egypt survives but is never the same. After the victory, a slow decay begins. Pharaoh's power weakens. The priests become more powerful than the kings. The country gradually splits, and over the following centuries, Egypt falls under the rule of foreign powers. It wins the battle, but loses the war with history. Because you can't survive alone when the whole world around you is dying. Egypt traded with these kingdoms. It bought cedar, tin, silver, and slaves. It sold grain, flax, and papyrus. When neighbors disappear, markets disappear. When markets disappear, the economy collapses. When the economy collapses, the army weakens. Even more bitterly, some of the sea peoples defeated by Ramses were later settled by him on the eastern borders of Egypt. Among them were the Pelaseth, the future Philistines. After a few generations, they became an independent people. Later, they would become enemies of the Israelite kings Saul and David. The victor himself created the future enemies of his successors. So what do we know? Ugarit fails to send his last letter. Pylos burns while observers wait for the enemy on the shore. The Hittites set fire to their own capital and disappeared into the mountains. Egypt won, but then lost everything slowly, piece by piece. There is no single cause. There is the perfect storm: drought, earthquakes, famine, riots, migrations, and a collapse in trade. Each of these disasters on its own could have been survived, but together, they left no chance. This is the real lesson of the Late Bronze Age. Civilizations don't always fall because they're weak. Sometimes they fall because they're too connected. And when one connection breaks, the whole network begins to fall apart. If this story made you think, like the video, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories to come about lost worlds, ancient catastrophes, and civilizations that have disappeared, but whose shadows still live on in our world.